Fairfax County Democratic Committee.
Okay. Thanks. Please.
My name is Jason Bunton.
All right.
Janice Yohai, Fairfax County Democratic Committee.
Kristen Cabral, Fairfax County Democratic Committee.
Didn't ask
Hi,
for
this is Robbie Udusky, Election Officer Manager.
who?
Robbie.
I've never heard of him.
Sorry I can't be there in person today.
Kimberly Adams, Springfield District Resident.
All right.
Is there anybody else? We have a whole list.
Is anybody else on the phone that hadn't checked in the last couple minutes here?
Just call the roll.
Yeah, I just joined. This is Robert Ware.
Yeah, hello. Go figure.
We'll find out as we go along.
Okay.
Sorry for starting a little late. It's 5:02. Fairfax County Electoral Board is in session. Welcome to our predominantly in-person, first predominantly in-person Electoral Board meeting in a little while. Left is Tina Lawton, the Vice Chair. To the right is General Kate Hanley, the Secretary, and I am Steve Hunt. Physically, not politically.
Okay, just wanted to clear that up.
Yes. I get to be the chair, because I have the least amount of votes. Do you wish to go around the room as per our prior? Start here and then we'll work our way around the room, identify yourself and the group you're with, if any.
I'm Scott Konopasek, the General Registrar, Director of Elections.
I'm Jean Tenson, the Chief Election Officer and Election Junkie.
I'm Christine Brim, Fairfax GOP.
Jeff Shapiro, Fairfax GOP, point of contact with the board.
Jonna Sachs, Fairfax GOP Election Integrity Committee.
Maggie Lugo, League of Women Voters.
Arena Van Breda, League of Women Voters.
Jimmy Bierman, Chair, Drainsville District Democratic Committee.
Martin Desjardins, County Attorney's Office.
This is Stephen Smith, co-chair, FCEC, Election Law and Voter Protection Committee.
Richard Chu, Chair of Hunterville District, the Democrats.
Greg Brandon, FCDC. Jack Crowley, Executive Director, Fairfax County Democratic Committee.
Kate Garrison, Insurance Supply Manager staff. Alina Solik Escobar, Election Officer, Assistant Coordinator. Colin Shankowski, Assistant Registrar for Early Voting Satellites. Florence Brown, Office of Elections, Early Voting Satellites. Pat Ferguson, Office of Elections, Special Assistant.
Eric Spicer, Election Manager.
Beth Fessel, Clerk to the Electoral Board.
Could I put in a plea? I think we're all gonna have to speak from the diaphragm today because we're sitting under the air conditioning and it makes a little noise and you all gotta make more noise than it does if you want us to hear you. The other thing is we have people on the phone and so you're really gonna have to project, as we say in the business. Kate Hanley, go ahead.
How's the agenda?
The agenda's fine and I move its adoption.
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
The agenda is adopted as published.
I will move jointly the approval of the minutes of June 3rd and June 9th. The June 9th is the canvas are the canvas minutes, and I so move.
I'll second.
Any comments, concerns? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Minutes are approved unanimously.
Mr. Chairman, I move the adoption of additional election officers, the additional election officer list for a total of 77 officers, 25 Democrats, 36 Republicans, and 16 independents.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Mr. Registrar.
Thank you. It's great to meet in person and to see faces and associate them with the voices that I've heard in some of the previous meetings. I'm not going to read or necessarily go into detail on my report. Just want to call a couple things to your attention. The first thing is voter registration numbers. We will start tracking differences from one month to another and report them here just to show the trends. If you'll notice that there's a huge reduction in inactive voters, and that's because of the NVRA cancellation process for voters who have been in an inactive status for more than 2 federal elections. That was done at the end of June, and almost 15,000 voters fell into that category, and their records were moved from inactive status to cancel status. Veris, the infamous Veris, is still, the selection process for a replacement system is still ongoing. I met with the commissioner, Chris Piper. We talked about the importance of Fairfax County having a seat at the table as after the vendor is selected and the final details of the application are put together. And we will continue to follow up to make sure that Fairfax County has a voice in the follow-on system. We're finally getting to the point where we can.
Scott, wait a second. Sure. Folks on the phone, if possible, could you mute? Because we're getting some breathing and scraping and various other noises. So if possible, please mute your phones.
And as we've interrupted, can I remind everybody to sign in, Pat, if when you're back there, you're gonna pass it around?
Oh, thank you.
Will you catch people as they come in the door to be sure to sign in, so we can share stuff with them if there's stuff to share? Yes, okay.
Go ahead, sorry.
So generally after a primary election, there's a time to decompress and the pace of things slows down. But as you can see from the report, there's been a lot of things going on, a lot of activities, a lot of list maintenance. We just talked about the NVRA mandated removal of inactive voters. The state also ran the Ncoa verification in the last couple of weeks. It's an annual requirement to verify that voters still live in the county. This Ncoa verification was not performed in 2020 due to the pandemic. However, it's been done now, and almost 22,000 people were mailed a confirmation to confirm whether or not they continue to live in the county. And so far, and those voters have 30 days to respond and to say yes or no. And if they fail to respond, they are automatically moved to the inactive voter list and begin that 2 federal election cycle to see if they resurface and update their registration. We've received 4,400 confirmations returned by voters who have said, yes, I'm still here. Voters are responding to it. We expect to continue to receive those notifications for a period of time. Another mailing that was done is as a result of the change in the law allowing or requiring that previously submitted applications for absentee ballots to receive a ballot on an annual basis. The law changed, converting that annual request to a permanent ongoing request. The state required that we notify voters of this change, that their status was changed to a permanent absentee voter, and giving them the option to opt out of that. And we mailed out almost 16,000 notifications, and we received back 212 opt-outs from that mailing. Let's see. Another major event was the updating of the firmware and some hardware on our voting machines. That was wrapped up this week. Very efficiently done by our vendor and our warehouse team, our rover team at the warehouse. It took much less time than what we anticipated. Our whole fleet of voting equipment, to include all of the DS200s, the DS850s, and the express votes have been updated. Remaining to be updated is our server and our electionware software, which we anticipate being updated early in the month of August. I mentioned the June election a second ago. It seems like so long ago that so many things have been going on. We provided a statistical summary here of the high points of the election. And many of you may recall that we talked about trying a couple of pilots, doing a few things differently. And I failed to report back on those in this written report. But we piloted using the electronic media returned on election night to produce election results in parallel with the traditional call-in voting is a very successful test. Because the election was coded prior to us really knowing that we were going to do this, we didn't really exercise all of the options that were available. So our plan is to report from electronic media in November. But at this point in time, our plan is to do that again in parallel with the call-in, with the expectation that it will be successful and that November will be the last time we do the call-in, pending the results of that. But that's our anticipation. We tried another thing during the canvass, and I'll let Eric, the election manager, report back on that.
We kept everything in the canvas, the same processes, but we changed the order to focus first on the most important task, which was verifying the results. How many votes for each candidate? And so that's the first thing we did. It was much more efficient, saved a lot of time, got through the process very quickly, and it was a very, very, very efficient process.
And we plan on making that a permanent part of our operation going forward. So looking forward to the November election, there's a couple of activities that are kind of relevant right now. One is by mail absentee voting. We talked about the conversion of annual requests to permanent requests. So from here on out, and this is going to be a change and may take some getting used to, is we're going to have a pool of voters that we know way ahead of time are going to receive an absentee ballot. And that pool of voters is going to continue to grow. And and each time we meet, we will report back to you the current number of people in a permanent absentee voter status. As of now, we have nearly 25,000 people who are scheduled to receive a ballot in our first mailing in September. And as I said, we expect that number to continue to grow. For planning purposes, we are looking at 100,000 absentee ballots being requested and mailed out, which is a lot less than November 2020, but tremendously more than what we've ever had outside of the 2020 election. So as a result, we're looking at how to handle that increased capacity. Another change in state law that permits us to use a third-party mailer to assemble and mail the ballots. We're looking, we've been visiting and communicating with 3 different service providers, ballot printers / mailers. We're evaluating their responses to our needs, and we expect to make a decision very soon as to who will provide those services. Now, just to make sure that we're clear, given a couple of questions that have come up, this mailer, the printer mailer, will only be mailing out the ballots. Will have nothing to do with the processing of the ballots after the voter casts those votes and returns them to us. All that processing will continue to be done here by the cap. So that there is no change to that part of the process.
I think the other point possibly that we should make here is they're only going to be mailing ballots to people that are either on the annual list or that have requested them.
Correct.
This is not a ballot to everybody that's registered.
Absolutely. I'm no longer in California and mailing a ballot to everybody.
I heard that.
Yeah. So yes, that's a good clarification. These are ballots that will only be mailed to voters who have submitted a valid request this year or an ongoing request to receive a ballot. And that list is maintained daily as people move out or opt out. Their status is changed. As voters sign up for absentee ballots, that number will go up. It's my understanding that a third-party group will be doing significant mailing over the next few weeks, soliciting people to sign up to be absentee voters. We're prepared and geared up to handle the responses that we'll get. So the next time we get together, I expect that the number of absentee voters in queue to get a ballot in September will go up dramatically. So that's the pretty much the story on the vote by mail and the absentees. In-person voting is scheduled to begin, proposed to begin on September 17th. The board needs to finalize or modify the staff's recommendations as to the number of locations, dates and times. I've attached to my report the staff's proposal for early voting satellite locations. Basically, it's the same as for June with the addition of a new location in South County at the South County Government Center. That is going to be a unique situation. It is going to be a satellite office in a tent. It will be a large party tent, event tent, with its own power generation at the south end of the south parking lot. Voting will occur there. The reason that we're doing it outdoors or in a tent environment there is because the lack of accessible facilities in the area. So the high school that has previously been used is not accessible. There's not enough room in South Government Center itself to use. So we're capitalizing on the location. We're capitalizing on the fact that it's on public transportation routes to provide another early voting or satellite voting opportunity for voters. More details as to how that tent and that situation will be configured will be forthcoming as we finalize those plans.
Have you done that before?
Yes, as a matter of fact. Last October, in California, we were unable to secure the use of buildings that we had historically used for polling places and early voting sites, but we were able to obtain permission to use their parking lots. Most of them happened to be churches and said, if we can't meet in church, you can't come in our building and vote, but you can use our parking lot. So we took advantage of that. We contracted and had 10 very large 20 by 40 tents set up with power generation, porta potties, and hand washing stations, and it was very, very successful and well received. So we're going to try it here. I'm very confident it will work. There were some lessons learned that we'll be able to apply here. And we look forward to describing what that will be in a future report. In terms of days and hours of operation, in March, we had a staggered opening. The Government Center opened on Friday, and the other two satellite offices opened on Saturday. Our proposal is that all...
In March or in June?
Or June. Well, in April, I guess. It's April for the June
April,
election.
yeah.
Excuse me. It threw me off. So instead of having a staggered start, all three locations are gonna open on the Friday, the 17th of September, and be open on that Saturday, the 18th. From there on out, the Government Center location, well, actually, all the way through the process, the Government Center location here will be open during normal business hours, and the other satellite offices will be open from noon to 7 p.m. during the weekdays. Okay. Again, for June, we had different times for the early open, the 45-day sites versus the 13-day sites. We are trying to simplify things and make it easier to communicate to voters when voting is going to be available. So they all will have the same schedule during the week of 12 p.m. to 7 p.m. We moved the closing time from 5 p.m. back to 7 to allow people to have time after normal working hours to vote. Saturdays, we will be open 3 Saturdays. The first Saturday in September, and then the last 2 Saturdays prior to the election. The hours on Saturday for all locations are proposed to be 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. And for the first time, we will open on one Sunday for satellite offices, and that schedule will be 1 p.m. to 5 p.m. All locations will be open on Saturday and the one Sunday. So it's the staff has proposed this plan. We've gone over it. We're very comfortable with it. We think it simplifies things. It expands the number of hours available for voters to vote, more closely aligns to people's schedules, and we propose its adoption by the board.
Mr. Chairman, one of the things I thought was particularly interesting is for something that I thought was either hieroglyphics or modern art. There were several centuries in between there, so I didn't know for sure which one. But, and I bought it. The time studies are very interesting, and I think that's useful. One of the other things that I appreciate about this, have we decided on the location of the Sunday opening yet?
It's all locations.
All locations. Oh, okay, good. I thought it was just one. Mr. Chairman, I will move approval, recognizing that we have been able to adjust from the lessons that we learned from last year to address some of the issues that we had with the change in availability of early voting, that you didn't need an excuse. And I also appreciate the 10 straight days, that there are not so many gaps. We have 10 straight days of you being able to vote. If I didn't do it today, I can do it tomorrow. And you've got 10 days, and I think the standardization will be helpful in being sure that people know not only where to go, but when to go. So I appreciate that. And the adjustment of some of the other things, keep it in a manageable proportion to the rest of what we need to do into our budget. So I appreciate that as well. So I'm gonna move approval.
I'll second the approval of the staff proposal.
Any discussion? Do you have any
just have a question. Are you cool, or is that from the audience, or?
Let's see, frequently we ask parties.
Okay, let's ask the parties. Go for it, I moved and seconded.
Mr. Chairman, can I just ask, as people talk, because there's a lot of new faces and older faces that have changed a lot during COVID, if people could re-identify themselves when they start to talk, so we can make sure the record's clear as to who's talking.
Speak up too.
Okay, this is Jeff Shapiro, Fairfax GOP. And I just had a question about whether you'll be tracking usage. Like, will you be able to know on this Saturday who voted in each satellite, partly for being able to see whether people actually use the satellite. I was struck in the Democrat primary by the fairly low numbers of in-person absentee ballots. That could be, a fluke, but just curious if you'll be able to speak to that, if there's any consideration in the future of whether these satellites are appropriate.
Well, we'll have quantity.
That was my
We'll have
clarification.
Quantity,
Yes.
yeah.
Not the who individual, you're talking.
Yeah, I'm just talking numbers.
We have those records back for pretty much as long as we've been doing it.
Okay.
We keep track of those, in various ways, but yes.
Jonna Sachs, Fairfax, GOP. For the permanent absentee ballot, people that request the permanent,
We keep the questions right now to this issue, and then
he
we'll
had
come back.
mentioned that, so I was just
Yeah,
asking questions.
we'll come back on the overall GIS report, but right now we've got a motion on the floor.
Okay.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously.
One other item that I want to advise the board and submit to the record. I received a number of questions from Mr. Shapiro and the Republican Party. This morning, we responded to them, and I'm submitting a list of questions and our responses for the record.
And I actually, if I might, take the liberty of thanking Mr. Shapiro for putting it all together, and instead of one question at a time over a long period of time from a number of people, this was very efficient, and I thank you. I would say I hope you do it again, but I hope you do it that way again if you're going to do it.
Questions from the board on the GIS report?
I'm sure I can go back in the record and look this up, but if you are, and of course my mind went totally blank, I'm looking right at you, have the total number of absentee ballots that was mailed out in the primary. We've got the results of how many came in. Do we know the
Right.
total that went out?
Cheryl, do you happen to know that off the top of your head?
Give me 2 minutes and I'll go get it, I'll get you the exact number.
It seems like it was about 17,000.
Yeah, something, about 17,000, but you want a closer number?
No, that's fine. I was just wondering in terms of the percentages, how many went out did we get back this time to try and normalize that number, since the presidential is always extraordinary and last year's was even more. So I was just trying to see if we were normalized.
Yeah, that's it,
Thanks.
we don't know what normal's gonna be until COVID's over. I know.
17,676.
It's in the minutes.
That was about something.
Well, this was a test to how many of us could, never mind.
Find it in the minutes.
Reports, are we doing?
No, questions to the GIS?
No.
I got a couple.
Yes, sir.
Just to kind of educate folks and remind me, what is the determining factor for who gets mailed the NCOA? So there were 21,786 voters. Why those 21,000?
Good question. And we often just take for granted that people understand our lingo and jargon, but happy to explain. So the NCOA is the National Change of Address database. The state, on an annual basis, submits all the voter records from Veris to NCOA to be scrubbed against their address files. to see if any of the voters have a different address listed or noted with the NCOA. It returns back a list of who those people are, and sometimes it provides updated addresses for those voters. Sometimes it just says they're no longer there. So because we cannot take that information from a third party at face value and change the status of voters without confirming with the voters, the process is that they are mailed a confirmation, a forwardable confirmation, so they can receive it if they actually have moved, and receive it if they haven't moved. And it asks them to update their information for us for our records. So someone who is reflected in the National Change of Address database as having an address change, different from the one in the voter file, is triggered. Now within those, there are voters who have a new address within the county. Those voters' records are updated to reflect the new address here in the county. There are voters identified who have moved out of the county or out of the state, and those voters are flagged as well. They get, those are the, well, there's another set of voters, those who haven't, for some reason, the post office says it's not a deliverable address. So those latter two receive a confirmation asking them, have you moved out of Fairfax County or not? The group that we make an update to the registration, they're mailed a confirmation asking if we're making this change correctly, if they actually have it. So everyone who is affected by NCOA is provided a notice to confirm the change. And those who fail to respond when it appears that they've moved out of the county, those are the voters that go into an inactive status. Those voters who we make an update to their address to in the county that we don't hear from them, their status remains as an active voter at the new address. This is by both state and federal law.
So if they either don't respond, or if, say, the letter gets returned as undeliverable, both of those categories go into
Inactive status.
Inactive status.
Right. And when they respond and say, yes, I moved to Michigan, then we cancel them and their record goes to cancel status.
And this is the entire voter roll versus the entire NCOA.
Yes.
So that if it got flagged last year, and they're still in the rolls, it would be flagged again this year.
Yes, that's correct. This also does a cleanup of any lingering voters, because the state didn't do an NCOA last year. Doing it this year pretty much catches us up and brings us current. So we're not missing any information that we would have had last year now.
And again, I should know, I'm gonna ask, so you can remind me, for the shifting absentee voters to a permanent annual absentee voter, was that a one-time deal for everybody on the rolls, or is that gonna happen every year now? Every time somebody requests an absentee ballot, are they automatically gonna end up on the permanent absentee ballot list?
Good question. No, this was a one-time event, converting annual requests to permanent. The absentee request forms have been revised so that the voter indicates if they want to be a permanent absentee voter, or if they want a ballot for a specific election, or only for the next election. So the voter exercises their choice of what they do.
Did the SNS do any other maintenance besides just the upgrades? Were they looking at any other machines that we've had issues with?
Well, they touched all of our machines. All of our voting machines were part of the upgrade.
But did they do
Any maintenance?
Maintenance or review to
Actual
make sure it
maintenance,
was working?
yes, they actually
working well?
repaired many of the machines. I believe there was 2 machines that, we need to RMA and return to them. 3 machines. 3 machines they were unable to repair here, so they're gonna be shipped, under an RMA process for depot level maintenance, and then we'll get them back.
The modification to the canvas, the things that we didn't do initially were still done, right?
Were still done.
Still the review of number of ballots.
Right.
And
No tasks were dropped.
it was just
They
a
were just
reordering.
reorganized.
Have we come up with a way to get the Veris codes to a printer who can print them in an envelope?
Yeah, actually, we have received a lot of movement and cooperation from the state in terms of facilitating having a third-party mailer do the mailing. Part of that is the actual data. So just in the last couple of days, Veris has been modifying its data exports and providing the information that a mailer would need to be able to produce the mailing, to include the IFB barcode issue that was an issue last year. Also, similarly, since the law changed permitting a mail house to handle the large volume, they changed the envelope requirements to make that actually physically possible. So the state has said that jurisdictions, for purposes of automating their mailing, can go from the 4 traditional envelopes to 2 envelopes under certain circumstances and subject to the approval by the state. So the state has been
going away.
So the inner envelope, the final, the one that says open in the presence of a witness, that envelope goes away. And the B and the C envelope, we have permission to combine them, provided we still provide the same information. For the A and B, well, two of the 2 envelopes that come back, we have permission to combine. Now, we don't know what those envelopes are going to look like. Part of the process of selecting a mail house, a printer mailer to do this, is for them to propose what designs work for them. And we have been receiving them back, and we're reviewing them to see if they work for us. They will have to be approved by the post office, and of course, approved by the state. So right now, we're just in the beginning stages of the process. We're making sure that it's even possible to do that. We're asking vendors to be able to provide a service that's physically able to be provided. But all indications are that the state wants to make this work, both in terms of the envelope design and also in terms of the data export that they'll make available to do the address of the mail. So it's not a completely done deal yet, but everything's moving in that direction. And I would suspect by late next week, we'll know if it's possible and the direction that we want to go.
The fact that we're not having to print labels and stick them on envelopes.
It's gonna be a huge
Is a victory in and of itself.
Yes. Not only for accuracy, but for expense.
So what I'd ask is that folks kind of keep in mind the questions that they have, and we have public comment. We can bring up questions that may have come from the general registrars. Yes, ma'am. Electoral board report?
I think the last.
Never last.
Okay, mine is a housekeeping item. For those of you on Polycom and those of you in the room, you know that we're in an amazing state of flux right now on how we can have meetings and how we can broadcast meetings and what we have to do to have public meetings. I noticed the county attorney's here, and I don't know that this is his particular expertise, but there was a meeting last week of staff to talk about in the county, to talk about hybrid meetings now, because now that people have been able to see us from home, they don't want to come see us in person. And that may be fine with us, except that it's really complicated to do. The meeting.
Just for this.
Yes, you're gonna, in any case, there are two kinds of hybrid meetings. So when people talk about hybrid meetings, let's set the ground rules. Most of what Fairfax County is talking about are hybrid meetings when the 3 members can't be in the same place. And so that there are all kinds of rules, as you know, with FOIA and everything, about how you have to call in, and we had crossed that threshold many years ago when we changed our bylaws to be sure that when one of us was absent, they could call in, and that's allowed by law. There is a new law to that, and that's much of what the discussion is, that we can now be absent, we can have an excused absence. I'm an old school teacher. If someone in our family's sick, it doesn't have to be us, there are other reasons. That is a change in the law that we will administratively fix. The other kind of hybrid meeting is the discussion to have people in the room like you are, and glad to see you, and people to be able to see us all, and in other words, do a Zoom as well, have people be able to visually join us. The county cannot support that at this time. There is no way. Is that a fair assessment of, it's just not quite doable. Right now, it's done in the boardroom, and we are not allowed to meet there. It's done in the board's room 11, the board's committee room, and we don't meet there. And that's also done, if we think about it in technology, that's done through cable television. Zoom isn't cable television, as we all recall. It's over the internets or the interwebs or whatever those things are called. I'm kidding, I know this. And so getting an arrangement to be able to have people see us and hear us is the challenge. And I've been asking groups that have been doing this, trying to get, and I sit on a board that's trying to do it, another one trying to get this fixed. And it's a work in progress, because the audio is the problem for most. We can fix it so that we can see you and you can see us, but you can't hear us very well. So we're working on that. The county was looking at it, I'm told, and the demonstrations didn't go very well, but we're not necessarily a county board or commission. That's the other complication. But we are going to look at some ways to do that. We're going to try to move forward with that and find the technology, but we're not there yet. And it's like when we started this pandemic a year and a half ago, it was hard to figure out how to meet remotely, and now everybody just can do it very quickly if we don't have to do the hybrid. So I want to assure those of you that are back on telecom that we're going to try to figure out a way to do this. We must, as we open meetings, allow the public, because we have to have, if we're here, the public has to be able to come in. So we are not able to legally go back right now to total Zoom meetings. So that's where they have us, of course, given the changes in the pandemic and all kinds of other things. I don't know where we'll be 6 months from now or 3 months from now. But right now we're trying to find ways to work this out without investing an awful lot of money. The other difficulty is that we're kind of peripatetic. We meet in various places at various times. And we meet here or out there, or if Cheryl's people are using this room, we meet in that room. So it's hard to figure out. We can't really get on anybody's schedule because we don't meet the third Thursday of every month. So that's another complication, that we want to be flexible enough to figure out how to do this. So that's my apology to the people on telecom that can't hear us, and we're working on it. believe it or not, that's all I have. I'll answer questions if I can.
I'll just add that, while we were doing our best, having run meetings in all three of those environments, running a hybrid, phone and in-person is a real challenge.
Yes.
Because there's a difficulty, obviously, everybody on the phone can hear each other, everybody in the room can hear each other. A real challenge frequently for the people in either forum to hear each other and to run it, because it's just a bit of a challenge. It's much easier to interact with the folks that are in the room, and the folks that are online can sort of get forgotten unless we make a real effort, which we will try, to make sure that they are included in the process. Any questions or comments? Yes, sir.
My name's Dan Hiley. I represent myself. Judicial Watch claims that there are more voters on the voter rolls than there are people in the age range to vote. What has this board done about that? Is that incorrect, or did I miss it in the beginning?
Bring that up in public comment.
Did I?
I have a comment about what is relevant and what you were just talking about, if that's appropriate. This is Donna Rostam.
Go ahead, Donna.
Yeah, so I texted I emailed all of you. I mean, I really appreciate the opportunity to have a Zoom meeting in addition to the actual meeting. As a trial lawyer, we've been conducting hearings and trials and everything online, and it's definitely doable and it's easy to be done once the technology is in place. And for those of us old folks, I'm only speaking of myself, certainly not any of the electoral board members, but for those of our old folks who are not familiar with Zoom, we have become very facile with it and have become very adept at using it. So I would really encourage you, especially with the new COVID variant rearing its ugly head, mostly in red states, of course, but with the new COVID variant coming out, I would really encourage you to go forward with the Zoom meetings. I was sad to hear that we could only participate by telephone today, and Beth knows I just texted her early before the meeting saying, hey, we're not doing Zoom. So I understand that we're not able to do that today, but I think it's a real service that we in one of the wealthiest counties in Virginia ought to provide to our citizens. I think that I would really encourage you all to figure out a way to make it happen. And thank you all for all the work that you do.
Thank you, Donna. We're working on it.
Any other specific comment on this particular topic? Again, there's public comment later for folks that mention other issues. A couple things that I would like to bring up for us to make sure that we have an idea of how we're going to address, and I don't know if we already have a policy for these things or if we need to create them. My understanding is that now that we are outside of the emergency COVID restrictions, certain things are going back into place. Signatures are going back onto absentee ballot envelopes, therefore confirming signatures, etc. Drop boxes kind of got dropped. Did I intend that pun or not? Into the situation prior to COVID, and so we should be back to this methodology. You are only allowed to bring your ballot to the Office of Elections, and the drop box being extensions to the Office of Elections. So the law, as I understand it, unless they changed that, I didn't hear anything about changing that part of the law, you are only allowed to drop off your ballot. So with that, with the confirmation, if that is in fact still the law, how do we ensure, because I recall when pre-COVID, if you walked into the Office of Elections with a ballot to drop it off, there was confirmation that that was your ballot. How are we going to address that? Because I know that with the exception of the drop box that may or may not be worthwhile that was put out, the other drop boxes and satellites and in the polling locations are all manned. And so,
So, Consigliere back there is taking notes, I think, on this question. I thought that we still had, I didn't think that requirement changed, so of not being able to drop. Are you talking specifically just about the one out here?
I'm talking about all drop boxes, because my understanding, again, if somebody could
We're
maybe
gonna
do the
have-
research and determine
Right.
whether or not this was
Right.
correct or
So
not, is
I'm not,
before the idea of being able to bring multiple ballots to a drop box was a COVID emergency loosening of the code. And those emergency situation is no longer in place.
I will check on that.
Yeah, and-
That is not my understanding,
That's
but
not
I
my
wasn't
understanding.
here pre-COVID. But I will say just generally, that's been a requirement in many places over time, that you can only bring your own ballot back. But it is, virtually, it's extremely difficult, I won't say impossible, it's very difficult to enforce that. When someone can just walk down to the post office box and drop them in. So, we'll double check
It's pretty easy to
on.
enforce if they have more than one ballot. It's pretty obvious that
Right.
anything beyond one of them is not theirs.
Right, but that leads us almost immediately to the most common situation where a spouse is trying to drop off a ballot for their spouse. And
the law is
so-
law.
Folks,
Right.
I suggest, let me make this suggestion, because I think we're all, not clear precisely on if it goes back. I know I'm not. And let's ask, we have some guidance from the state on this that wasn't exactly that came out of the code, but wasn't, they interpreted it differently on us last year in the middle of the election. So I think we want to be sure that we find out what the clarification is and what the code says. And I wanna know too, so let's ask to have that come back.
We'll bring that back next meeting.
And speaking on behalf of the Democratic Party, we are unaware of anyone who has reported of anybody dropping multiple ballots. So this could be a perceived problem versus an actual problem.
No, that's not true. I have multiple people told me that they saw people showing up at the polling locations on election day with bags of ballots.
Bags of
Bags of ballots.
Bags of ballots, yes, truckloads, that's great laser.
I didn't say truckloads, you know, and you can discount my statements and my comments if you like, but I think that's inappropriate.
Okay, we will.
Next point is, business is probably gonna take me out of state late October for about 3 to 4 days. So just to keep that in mind, hopefully I will know by September which of the last 2 weeks in October I'll be gone. But just a heads up with respect to the logistics of what
We'll
we may have to
schedule
do.
the pre-election meeting either before you leave or after you get back.
Okay. So, Jeff Shapiro has introduced himself.
Yes.
Jeff is now the representative for the FCRC, and I just want to state that I want to thank Keith, although I don't think he's on the line, but Keith Damon fulfilled that for a long, long time, coming to many, many meetings.
Yes.
And I just want to state on the record that I appreciate the effort that he did and the long time that he served. So I recently hit the 8-year mark, and Keith was doing this before I came on the board, so he did that for a long time.
I would like to attach myself to your comments. I spent a long time working with Keith since back as far as 2012, I guess, and he has always done what he needed to do and been very present and very helpful, and I have appreciated working with him.
That, do we have any new business?
No, I think we've covered all the possible new business.
Okay, I know, for lack of a better way of doing this, and we'll just experiment, it's time for public comment. I'm gonna work my way through the room, and then we'll go to the phone. Does that seem like an acceptable way to give this a shot? So, Joanna brought up, Jonna brought up an issue first, and then we'll go to, gentleman in the front row.
Dan
and
Hiley.
work our way through.
So my question is, for the folks that request permanent absentee ballot status, for those that end up showing up on the national change of address listing and they become inactive, does that inactive flag then stop them from receiving a ballot in the mail? Okay, and then,
Yes, it does.
okay, so no one with an inactive status in Veris receives it.
It is automatically mailed ballot, correct.
Okay. And the other question I have is regarding the post office stamps for ballots. Do they always stamp like all the ballots, like if, when they're at the post office?
You mean postmark?
Yeah, postmark. Do they postmark all of them? And if there's a missing postmark, how do you verify that they were received in time for the election?
So historically, the post office has not postmarked business reply mail. But with all the states that have gone to business reply for returning ballots, they changed their practice and they do apply a postmark. They're supposed to apply a postmark. But like every piece of mail that goes through the system, there's no guarantee that that a postmark will be applied or that it will be legible. But the point is really moot as long as we receive the ballot by election day. Postmarks do not come into play. Postmarks don't come into play until Wednesday, Thursday, Friday after the election. And even when, it's from my experience, even when the post office fails to apply the traditional postmark on the envelope, there are fluorescent barcodes that are sprayed on the envelopes, so it can be processed through the post office's automation. It is possible to get the secret decoder ring from the post office to read those postmarks if that becomes an issue. So they're supposed to apply, so in some, yes, they're supposed to apply a postmark. It doesn't always happen. It's not really relevant until after the election, before Friday. And then, even then, there's still a safeguard if we get to the point where we feel like we need to check the secret fluorescent codes that the post
There's
office
also
puts
some
in.
guidance from the state on this. And we'll get a.
So if it's missing the fluorescent and it's missing the postmark, then you can't accept it, correct? Because you have to be able to verify that the post office received it by election day, correct?
There are some guidelines as to what to do when the postmark is missing or obscured or illegible. I don't know exactly what they are right now in Virginia. In other states, the voter is given the benefit of the doubt, and there's a date, the date of the signature is often used to determine whether it's mailed in time. But that's something I should look into.
Okay, thank you, I appreciate that. Because it concerns me that we do keep counting ballots, after election day, unfortunately. And that leaves room for some problems, I think.
Well, excuse me here, just a minute, we're always gonna have to keep counting ballots after election day because there'll be things that will have come in on election day in the mail that we'll have to count even before the law changed that we had to count after election day, so.
I think she means accepting.
Provisional
I think
and stuff.
I think she meant accepting ballots.
Yeah, okay, accepting.
Right.
In that research, I've been hearing there's a court case that actually happened after the election, as far as when the judge finally ruled.
Okay.
So.
The Virginia court case?
Yeah. Sir, you had a question about?
Yes.
Um,
My name's Dan Hiley. The Judicial Watch claims that there are more people on the voter rolls than there are voting age people in the county. Is that true?
There's a lag in the system with respect to, as you heard before, that when we go through this, and there are a couple different processes that identify what voters may go into an active status. They're on an active status for 2 years. And so they're on there for 2 years before somebody actually gets removed. And there's a balance that goes on with respect to cleaning up the voter rolls, because we don't want someone to walk in the door and say, you know, you're not on the rolls anymore, and we just take your name off the roll. So we need somewhat of an official notification through a government, be it the Social Security Agency or the post office or DMV or other things that give us that official notification. And to give folks an opportunity, there is that lag, and sometimes just the notification just doesn't come in. I've been informed that we've got people on the rolls that folks have found their obituaries. And there's somewhat of a lag there, as well as when it goes through the whole system in order to inform us that that person has in fact died. And so you end up with somewhat a group of people who are still on the rolls that exceed the number of people within the county.
If you take the census number, the active plus the inactive, which is bigger?
I don't have a
Well,
hard number.
the inactive voters should not be counted because there's uncertainty as to whether or not.
I know, but I
they're
just heard
actually-
that you want to keep them for 2 years, which is fine.
Well,
All I'm trying to
that's
get
the
a
law.
feel for is the census says one number, which should be less than active voters plus inactive voters,
So-
in my mind. Do we
Yeah.
know that?
So I'm very familiar with the Judicial Watch, and I'm very familiar with the case they brought against LA County a couple of years ago. So everything that Steve said about a lag in the records being current, even though list maintenance goes on a daily basis, is totally true. The case in Los Angeles that got a lot of notoriety was because LA County failed to do what we just talked about here this evening that we did in June, which is remove the inactive voters from the rolls after 2 federal elections. For many years, LA County never did that final removal step, so those voters stayed in an inactive status for an extended period of time, which exaggerated the number of people that appeared to be registered in the county. So
glad
there's
you're more
always a
diligent.
lag, but it's never one, if the counties are doing what they're supposed to do, there's never one where the sum of the inactive and the active will exceed the number of citizens in the jurisdiction.
Well, it's not citizens, it's citizens of voting age. Do you know those numbers? The census number of the citizens of voting age?
Let me jump in here a minute as,
Sure.
yeah, thank you. We get, this Judicial Watch letter goes to a number of jurisdictions, I think every year. And if we can find the answers, we have a new, there's a whole, we responded one year, this is, Judicial Watch sort of has a list of people they send this letter to. But, remember the census now is 10 years old. We don't really have new census numbers, so the census is not necessarily a good balance.
Thank you.
And with the size of the county, you know, the percentage
People
numbers
come
are
and
gonna be
go.
larger than a smaller county would. I mean, it's a challenge, and it's something that the list maintenance is an ongoing process. There's also the limitations of the fact that you've got to stop doing them within, what, 60 days, is that right, of the election? Or?
60, 90 days.
There's some time
Well,
frame.
list maintenance includes a whole number of activities for managing the status of voters in the system. We do have blackout periods when we hit the registration deadline close to the election. We can no longer process registrations. We can't do any mass cleanup within a certain period of time, which I'm not exactly sure in Virginia what that time frame is. Usually 60 to 90 days, but it's kind of moot in this case because we just did, and we just reported on those major mass list maintenance activities that go on in a county, in a state. So between now and November, there will not be any mass list maintenance activities. Although individual transactions will be done every day. When people die, people are convicted of felonies, people register, people move. We are making those transactions every day. So it's a very dynamic, active process.
There's also,
Thank you.
a lot of this is controlled at the state level, like that mailing was done by the state level. And again, I go back and forth in my head, like information coming in from Social Security Agency or other organizations like that, I believe go through the state.
It goes through the state, and it's sent to us through Veris, and we process those transactions on a, like I said, on a daily basis. There are hundreds of transactions that go on every day. So our voter list today is not going to be the same as the voter list tomorrow. It's not going to be the same as the voter list yesterday. So it's a very dynamic thing, as it should be, to capture real time, or as close to real time as possible, a reflection of who our voters are. It's a very challenging process. We have a very dedicated team that works on it, and they're very, very good at what they do, and they stay up on top of the work on a daily basis.
Jeff?
Thank you.
You and then you, Jeff, go ahead.
Before I get to my main one, just on the postmark issue, when you're looking into it, I think you're going to find a regulation which Jeff Akey and myself also commented on. I think the regulation actually is outside the statute because they allow you to go to the date that the voter signed,
Yes.
which is
That's what I was
absurd.
gonna say, state guidance.
Is an absolutely absurd interpretation of the statute. But, and I also, it's interesting that those barcodes can give you the date. We didn't find that to be true. If it is, that's great. Yeah. Anyway, the reason I wanted to return to the question of the Dropbox and dropping multiple ballots. Actually, whether it's a mailbox or a Dropbox, this is not a ballot harvesting state. We have statutes that say that the voter has to vote. And the question, I think, for the board and for the state is how are you going to enforce that now that you're mass migrating people away from Election Day to Dropboxes and mailboxes? The code provision was renewed this year. It's part of the code. And the question is, unless it's a dead letter, how are you going to enforce it? And it seems to me that you can't, you can do a number of things, one of which would be to say you drop off one voter, one ballot, unless you go to the election office, in which case they can open the envelope and see whether you've signed the required form to be a representative for that voter. Other ways you could do it would be to figure out who's getting that assistance, have a list at the registrar, and when the ballots come in from any source, they're checked so that you know that you have a way of linking the ballot to the voter and knowing that that voter is the one who signed the form. Otherwise, you're not enforcing Section 705 and you're reading it out of the statute. I don't know if it's the board or the state that has to solve this problem, but somebody needs to.
So the question of how to enforce it is exactly the question. And And I'm open to guidance, if that is the law, and,
Well-
and if that is what we need to do, I'm open to hearing how we should enforce it.
Let us dig up the state guidance, for the last election, and
Well,
Well, the state guidance for the last
yeah, but,
election.
but the guidance for the last election is the guidance that is operable right now. The last time they issued guidance is the topic, and let's see, and if they're
Okay.
gonna issue new guidance,
Well, and
that's the state's issue.
I think we'll also have to push them to say, you need to readdress this, because
Right, and the statute was reenacted this year, as it currently appeared. I'm speaking to the way the statute reads now
Which
today.
statute? The one on drop boxes, or just the general, how you have to?
It's how you return, it's section 705.
Right.
The one on drop boxes, honestly, is a punt. It just says, the ballot shall show up by mail or by drop box or by the voter in person. It doesn't say, it's passive voice. It doesn't say who's doing the mailing or who's doing the drop box.
Next.
in the blue shirt,
Russell Vane. I was just wondering, who is the vendor who's doing the ballot machines, and where are the ballot machines right now?
The ballot machines are in our logistics facility, our warehouse, in a secure area. And Printellect, as a subcontractor for ES&S, was the company that performed the maintenance on our machines.
So is the address of that location classified? Is the address of the location where the ballots, where the voting
Machines are? No, it's the county logistics facility.
Okay, county logistics facility.
Yeah.
Okay.
secret location buried underneath
Well,
a volcano.
Secure.
It says a secure location, and
Secure.
that made me think classified, because I'm.
Just can't get into it.
In the purple.
Greg Brandon with FCDC. I was just wondering, what sort of security requirements do you anticipate for the tent down at the South County Government Center?
In the past, when I've done this, and which is the starting point for how we will do this voting center or satellite office in South County, was I had contract security folks there 24/7. All the sensitive items and equipment was locked up in a secure container, but when the site was not in operation, it was guarded by 2 contract security folks.
Thank you.
Christine?
Yeah, you mentioned that there would be a third-party contractor, or a third party anyway, who was going to go out and encourage people to, I don't know if it's apply or to clarify that they wanted permanent ballot status.
I don't know what they're gonna ask them. I just was
Not
told
us.
that there was going to be a mailing to the voters of Fairfax County.
We have seen historically a group that sends out, unfortunately, periodically confusing mailing to the people in Fairfax City and Fairfax County, frequently getting the return address backwards, so that we would receive the
City ones.
the city ones, and the city ones would go to, or the county ones would go to the city. And I think it was just saying that we're preparing for that confusion and that onslaught of that third party that we have no control over. It's not somebody we've contracted with or somebody we're interacting outside of the fact that we.
These are private groups.
It's a nonprofit.
They're not connected with us. They're groups that, on all issues you can imagine, on all sides of the spectrum, I suspect everybody in here can name 1 or 2, then they're all different. And they send out applications on lists that they may or may not have. Well, their lists are usually not very accurate because they're old and collected some way or another. They may just be to occupants sometimes, I think. Dear resident, and they have nothing to do with us, but they send applications out with a return envelope that comes back to us.
So just to clarify, you have some indication or no indication that this is going to happen again? Are you, you mentioned it.
Just
So was there a reason why you mentioned it? I mean, had you
Yes.
some indication that
Yes.
this was
Yes.
gonna happen?
It's swirling around in the election community that
Okay,
somebody.
that will happen again.
Right, that the
Yes.
Got
mailing
it.
is gonna happen again soon.
But not under your auspices at
No.
all?
And by the way, candidates of all kinds can do the same thing. And they do.
Any other? Yes, sir.
Hi, Jack with the Fairfax County Dems. With sort of I know one of the issues during the election last year was in regards to use of or in the June primary, sorry, I misspoke, was sort of the dual use of the government center here as both an early voting location as well as for vaccination. Has there been any conversations with regards to talking with the health department in case there is a rise in the Delta, Epsilon, or Lambda variant that requires a booster shot and then ramping up of vaccination here at the government center?
Sure.
All so far that we have been made aware of is that the health department is ramping down this large vaccination facility. I don't know, we keep in touch, and yes, that would be very complicated. As you will recall, we did vote on election day here, but we had early voting in our office, and it's not quite large enough to do that on a general, for a general election. So the county is aware of that problem, but we'll keep talking because this is a moving stream. It changes. But thank you for asking and reminding us that I need to go ask again.
And we also are gonna have 2 other locations now, that would take the pressure off of this facility if for some reason
Yeah.
it became more and more difficult. Yes, ma'am, in the back, green.
Yeah, I'm Sue Switek, election officer, but, I have one question and one comment. I was looking at, I think it's page 5, the page number, but it's the graph, and what I don't understand about the graph is the blue is 2020, I think, but the gaps are really, really big. It's like 3 or 4 little gaps in the graph. Is that just a weird?
I think that's the weekend.
Well, a weekend would be 2 days, and even if there's a major holiday, it just looks like if you look at the dark blue at the top, and the gaps are huge compared to the red. No, just a little, they're 2-day gaps.
What?
Well, I was looking, I had my paper and lining it up, and it looks like it's going, but maybe there's a major holiday in there.
I think you still get the trend line though.
There is a major holiday in there, and also each of these years may not have run exactly the same day.
The weekends fall on different days and different years. Helen is the one who made the chart, who said it's a 2-day gap, so I'll trust her since she made it.
Who knows, Columbus Day, plus. Yeah, oh yeah, let's get that right. The other comment I had is, as an election officer, whatever's decided about drop boxes, when you hash it out, is to really communicate clearly to all the chiefs and assistant chiefs exactly what's going on with drop boxes, because it was just a mess last time, because it was like, well, okay, I'm gonna be out here for 3 hours watching the drop box, what am I watching for? And then someone made a joke in here, oh, we're looking for a lit match, and drop in there. But really, sincerely, we need to know, is it one man, one vote, one voter, one vote, or is it a big bag? I mean, we weren't given any guidance at all. They said, don't disturb the voters, Now, we didn't have anybody with a big bag. We had some other weird incidents where some Fairfax City voter tried to do the Fairfax County, and we're like, stop, that looks really weird, what is that? But other than that, I mean, we didn't have any issues. It was one individual
We'll
bringing
always,
one. But
with
we
new
didn't have
stuff,
any guidance. It was very
we'll try to make sure
scary.
that gets out into the training, especially since this
Well,
is
just make it
relatively
clear
new.
to us, that's all.
Last call for the room. Who on the phone would like to make a comment or a question?
Press the
I'm
mute
moving.
button.
Hearing none.
I move we adjourn.
I'll second that.
In lieu of that, I have a question. a request that, you share with FCDC the questions and answers that, Mr. Shapiro asked.
Right, they're part of the record. They're available.
Send it to you.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned at
Thank you all for coming.
6:21.